Jumping into love, Valentina's story. The story begins on a sunny fall morning in Rome, Italy. Valentina, 32-year-old woman who has been married for 7 years, lives a seemingly perfect life. She works as a lawyer in a renowned firm, is respected by her colleagues, and has an elegant house in a noble neighborhood of the city. But despite everything, Valentina feels that something is missing in her life. There is a restlessness inside her, feeling that she is living a routine without emotion, without that spark that used to make her vibrate. That morning, while sipping her cappuccino on the balcony of her apartment, she decided she needed a change, something to break up the monotony. That's when she saw an ad on the internet about a skydiving experience in the Italian Alps. That's it, she thought. She had never done anything so radical, and the idea of jumping out of an airplane seemed exactly what she needed to feel alive again. When she told her husband, Giovanni, about her decision, he didn't pay much attention. He was more concerned about an important meeting he was going to have that day. "It makes you happy, go ahead," he said, without taking his eyes off the newspaper. This cold, uninterested response bothered her, but Valentina decided not to take too much notice. She was determined to do something for herself. On the day of the jump, she woke up anxious, but also excited. She drove to the airfield where the jump would take place and was met by Matteo, a skydiving instructor. Matteo was a charming 35-year-old man with a natural confidence that immediately caught Valentina's eye. He had piercing green eyes and a smile that seemed capable of melting even the coldest of hearts. While explaining the instructions for the jump, Matteo couldn't help but notice Valentina's nervousness. The touch of humor tried to calm her down. "Don't worry, I was like that too on my first jump, when I was 5, he said, laughing, which made Valentina let out a nervous giggle. There was something in the way he looked at her, an intensity she hadn't felt for a long time. As she boarded the plane, Valentina felt her heart racing. She tried to concentrate on Matteo's instructions, but she couldn't stop her mind from wandering. His eyes, smile, the way he spoke to her, as if they were the only ones there. For a moment, Valentina forgot everything. She forgot about Giovanni, office, her monotonous life. In that small plane, with the engines roaring in the background, all that existed was Matteo and the possibility of something new, something exciting. And then came the moment of the jump. Matteo by her side, she approached the door of the plane. Strong wind whipped at her face, heart beating so loudly that she thought she could hear it above the roar of the engines. Matteo looked deep into her eyes and, with an encouraging smile, took her hand. "Let's do this together," he said. And, without thought twice, they jumped. The strong wind, the feeling of freedom, falling into the void. It was an indescribable experience. But for Valentina, what really marked that moment was Matteo's closeness. They were connected in a way she had never felt before. The whole world disappeared, and all that remained was that man, that feeling. After the jump, as they parachuted down into the spectacular landscape of the Italian Alps, Valentina felt an adrenaline rush that she hadn't experienced for years. Matteo was by her side, guiding her skillfully and safely. When they finally landed, she felt her heart racing, but not just because of the jump. What really took her breath away was Matteo's closeness, the warmth of his presence. Matteo, always with that charming smile, helped her out of her gear, and then suggested they go for a coffee to celebrate the jump. Valentina hesitated for a moment, remembering Giovanni, but soon pushed the thought away. "Why not?" she replied, a smile she couldn't contain. Over coffee, they talked about everything and nothing. Matteo was a born storyteller, and every anecdote he told made Valentina laugh and feel lighter. He talked about his adventures, the places he had jumped, and also about life in the small town where he lived. Valentina, on the other hand, felt renewed, as if she had rediscovered a part of herself that had been dormant for a long time. Over the next few days, Valentina couldn't stop thinking about Matteo, about the way he made her feel alive, wanted, special. Parachute jump had only been the beginning. The real dive was into the storm of emotions that Matteo had awakened inside her. Giovanni, on the other hand, remained oblivious to everything. Always busy with work, he hardly noticed the changes in Valentina's behavior. She was more distant, more pensive, but he attributed this to the stress at the office. When she mentioned the heel or Matteo, Giovanni just nodded without paying much attention. He had no idea what was going on. A week after the jump, Valentina received an unexpected visit. It was from Matteo. "I hope you're well. I thought about you today. How about another jump? Or maybe something quieter, like a walk? I know a wonderful place in the Alps." Valentina's heart raced as she read those words. Matteo was thinking of her. He wanted to see her again. Valentina hesitated, but the temptation was too great to resist. She replied with a simple, "Yes, I'd love to." And so, a few days later, they met again. This time without the adrenaline of skydiving, but with a different expectation in the air. They met in a small village in the Alps, a remote place almost untouched by tourism. Matteo took her on a trail that he knew well, a path which led to a lookout point with a breathtaking view of the mountains. During the walk, they talked about everything, their dreams, fears, and finally, the emptiness they both felt in their lives. Matteo wasn't happy either. He had been in a relationship that didn't make sense for years, and he found skydiving to be his escape valve. When they reached the top, the view was breathtaking. Valentina lost herself in the beauty of the place for a moment, but soon realized that the real beauty was at her side, in the way Matteo looked at her, as if he could see beyond her perfect facade, right into her soul. It was there, on that viewpoint, that they kissed for the first time, a kiss full of desire, of longing for something they didn't even know they were looking for. After that day, Valentina and Matteo met more often. They made up excuses to see each other, always looking for remote places where they could be alone. Each meeting was more intense than the last, and Valentina found herself more and more involved, more in love. But at the same time, she knew she was entering dangerous territory. Giovanni, although distant, was a good man. He didn't deserve to be betrayed. Still, she couldn't stop. Matteo was like a magnet, pulling her into a reality she had never imagined. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't resist. With each encounter, each kiss, she moved further away from the life she knew, plunging headlong into a forbidden and overwhelming romance. But all this began to weigh on her conscience. Guilt, once a whisper, was now a scream inside her. She knew she had to make a decision. Continuing with Matteo meant destroying her marriage, her life as she knew it. But leaving him, well, that seemed impossible. Autumn was almost over, and with it, Valentina and Matteo's relationship was becoming more intense and complicated. She could no longer hide the anxiety and guilt that consumed her on a daily basis. The tension between her feelings for Matteo and her commitment to Giovanni was becoming unbearable. One day, after another secret meeting with Matteo, Valentina returned home with a heavy heart. Giovanni was sitting on the sofa, watching TV, but something seemed different about him. He looked at her with a serious expression, something Valentina hadn't seen for a long time. "We need to talk," he said, turning off the television. Valentina felt the ground open up under her feet. Did he know? Had Giovanni found out? But before she could formulate any answers, Giovanni continued. He told her that he was noticing her pulling away, that he felt something was wrong between them. He didn't know exactly what it was, but he was willing to do whatever it took to save the marriage. Giovanni suggested that they travel together, take some time for just the two of them, away from everything, to get away from it all, reconnect. Valentina, taken by surprise, didn't know how to react. Giovanni's offer was tempting, but at the same time, she knew that her feelings for Matteo wouldn't disappear with a simple trip. Nevertheless, she agreed. Perhaps this was her chance to put things right, save what was left of her marriage. She had to at least try. The trip was scheduled for the following weekend. In the meantime, Valentina decided to meet up with Matteo to tell him about her decision. They met in a discreet cafe in the center of Rome. Matteo, always attentive, noticed the tension on her face before she even said a word. "I'm going on a trip with Giovanni," she said bluntly. "He wants to try to save our marriage, and I have to do it. I need to try." Matteo listened to her in silence, the usual smile disappearing from his lips. When she had finished, he looked at her with an intensity that made her heart almost stop. "Valentina," he said with frightening calm, "if you go on this trip, we'll end up here. I can't go on like this, being your second choice." Those words hit her like a punch in the gut. She knew Matteo was right, but the pain of imagining a life without him was unbearable. At the same time, the thought of destroying her marriage, hurting Giovanni, was just as devastating. Valentina was at a crossroads, and any path she chose seemed to lead to pain. She returned home that night with her head and heart in turmoil. The weight of the decision she had to make prevented her from sleeping. And then, in the middle of the night, something happened. She received a message from Matteo. "Meet me at our place tomorrow at noon. I need to show you something." The next day, Valentina left the house, telling Giovanni that she needed to sort something out at the office. However, she drove straight to the viewpoint in the Alps where she and Matteo had kissed for the first time. When she arrived, Matteo was already there, waiting for her. He didn't say anything, just took her to the edge of the cliff, where he had prepared a small picnic. The view was stunning, as always, but Valentina could hardly enjoy the scenery. She knew something important was about to happen. Matteo finally broke the silence. "I can't do this anymore, Valentina. I'm falling in love with you, and I can't live in the shadow of your marriage any longer. I need you to choose. Either you stay with me, or you try to save your marriage. There is no middle ground." Valentina was paralyzed. There, in that place that had been the scene of so many happy moments, she realized that she couldn't go on living like that. She loved Matteo, but she also knew that if she chose him, she would be destroying everything she had built with Giovanni. She had to make a decision, and it had to be right then. Valentina stood there, in front of Matteo, with the weight of the world on her shoulders. The silence between them was almost palpable, and time seemed to have stopped. The choice she had to make was clear, but that didn't make it any less painful. "I don't know what to do, Matteo," she finally said, her voice breaking. "I love you, but I also love Giovanni. In different ways, but I do. And I don't know how to choose between you two." Matteo looked at her, his green eyes filled with a sadness Valentina had never seen before. "Sometimes, Valentina, loving two people doesn't mean you can be with both of them. You need to think about what you really want for your life, what makes you truly happy." These words echoed in her mind all the way back to Rome. When she arrived home, Giovanni was preparing dinner. He had gone out of his way to create a cozy atmosphere, with candles on the table and an open bottle of wine. Seeing him like this, so intent on winning back something he perhaps didn't even know he had lost, Valentina felt a pang of guilt so strong that it almost made her crumble. During dinner, Giovanni tried to be attentive, to make light conversation, but Valentina was distant, lost in her own thought. She knew she couldn't go on like this. If she wanted to save her marriage, she had to be honest, with Giovanni, and above all, with herself. That evening, after a long silence at dinner, Valentina made a decision. She looked at Giovanni, who was watching her with concern, and finally opened her heart. She told him everything. About Matteo, about what she had felt, about how she had become more involved than she should have been. The words came out with difficulty, interspersed with tears that she couldn't hold back. Giovanni listened to everything in silence, without interrupting, without reacting much. When Valentina had finished, he took a deep breath and in a calm voice asked, "Do you love him?" This question made her hesitate. Yes, she loved Matteo, but at the same time, she loved Giovanni. The difference was that love for Giovanni had become something comfortable, almost familiar, while what she felt for Matteo was intense, overwhelming, but also dangerous. "I don't know what I feel anymore, Giovanni. All I know is that I'm lost and I need to find myself again." Giovanni remained silent for a while, digesting everything he had heard. Then he stood up and in an unexpected gesture, hugged her. "I got lost too, Valentina. Maybe we can find each other, or maybe not. But we need time to understand this." Those days were ones of deep reflection for both of them. Valentina decided that she needed to get away from everything in order to think clearly. Giovanni, understandably hurt, agreed. He too needed some time to process everything that had happened. They decided that Valentina would spend a few weeks at her parents' house in the Italian countryside to distance herself and reflect on what she really wanted. During this time, Valentina dedicated herself to rediscovering who she was. She strolled through the countryside, read books she had abandoned years ago, and spent hours talking to her mother, who, although she didn't know all the details, understood that her daughter was going through a crucial moment in her life. Without the constant presence of Matteo and Giovanni, Valentina began to realize that perhaps the answer to her problems lay not in choosing between one or the other, but in rediscovering her own value, her own desires and dreams. She started practicing meditation, something she had learned on a retreat years before, and this helped her to calm her mind and focus on what really mattered. Little by little, the anxiety that had previously dominated her thoughts gave way to an unexpected clarity. She realized that her happiness couldn't depend completely on someone else, be it Matteo or Giovanni. She had to be happy with herself first. After 3 weeks in the countryside, Valentina felt it was time to return to Rome and face whatever was waiting for her. During this time, Matteo had tried to get in touch, but she had decided not to reply. She knew she needed to face Giovanni and sort things out before anything else. When she returned home, Giovanni was there, waiting for her. He seemed different, calmer, more resolute. Valentina realized that the time apart had done them both good. They sat down to talk, and this time the conversation was more serene, more open. Giovanni confessed that he had also missed something in his marriage, but had never known how to express it. They talked about their fears, their frustrations, and how they had let routine destroy what had once been a vibrant relationship. At the end of that conversation, Valentina realized that, whatever happened next, she had grown. And that growth, that new understanding of herself, was something she could never lose. After meeting Giovanni again, Valentina felt that something fundamental had changed inside her. Clarity she had achieved during her time apart still guided her, but now she had to face the consequences of her choices and the inevitable confrontation with her feelings for Matteo. Valentina decided that the next step would be to close the chapter with Matteo once and for all. She knew she needed to be honest and clear, both with him and with herself. There was no more room for half-truths or excuses. She needed to resolve this situation once and for all so that she could move on. She arranged to meet Matteo at the same lookout point where they had met so many times. The place that had once seemed like the perfect refuge now carried a different weight. When he arrived, Matteo was already there, staring at the horizon, as if he knew that this conversation would be the end of their story. "Valentina," he said as he saw her approaching, "I knew you'd come, but I also know you're here for." Those blunt words caught her off guard but also brought a strange sense of relief. She wouldn't have to explain as much as she thought. Matteo, always so intuitive, had already understood. "Matteo, I'm so sorry," she began, her voice firm but filled with emotion. "I got lost in all of this. I let myself be carried away by something I couldn't sustain. You were the escape from a reality I didn't want to face, but now I see that running away wasn't the solution. I love you, but I can't go on like this. I need to find my own way, and it can't be built on lies." Matteo looked at her, the pain evident in his eyes, but instead of anger or frustration, he just sighed as if he had been expecting this moment too. "I understand, Valentina, and as much as it hurts to say this, maybe you're right. You can't build something true on shadows and secrets. I need to move on too." The silence that followed was painful, but also liberating. Valentina felt that, despite the sadness, she was finally on the right path. When she turned to leave, Matteo called out to her one more time. "I wish you find peace, Valentina, and that, in the end, you'll be truly happy, no matter what path you choose." She simply nodded, unable to say anything more. Those parting words, simple but sincere, were exactly what she needed to hear. Valentina left the viewpoint with a heavy heart, but at the same time, lighter than she had felt in a long time. When she returned home, she found Giovanni sitting on the porch, looking at the stars. He looked up when he saw her, and the moment their eyes met, she knew he was ready for a final conversation too. They sat side by side, and Valentina took a deep breath before speaking. "Giovanni, I ended things with Matteo, and I need to tell you that. I love you, but I realize that what we have now is a friendship, a deep affection for each other. But maybe it's not enough for a marriage. The life we've built together is beautiful, but I feel like we've lost our way." Giovanni listened attentively, and when she finished, he took her hand. "I've thought a lot about this too, Valentina. and I've come to the same conclusion. We've built something solid, but without the love that brought us together in the beginning, maybe it's better to go our separate ways. I don't want us to live a life of convenience without passion, without the joy we once had. The mutual decision was painful, but surprisingly peaceful. They knew this was the right choice. In the following weeks, they began to discuss the details of the separation, how they would maintain the friendship and respect they still had for each other. Valentina stayed in the house until she found a new place to live, and Giovanni began to prepare for a new phase of his life as well. However, before separating completely, Valentina and Giovanni, they decided to take one last trip together to celebrate the good times they had shared. They traveled to Tuscany, a place they had always loved, and spent a few days reliving memories, laughing and crying together, but mainly saying goodbye, dignity, and respect. On the last day of the trip, while watching the sunset, Giovanni turned to Valentina and said, "Thank you for being my wife. I learned so much from you, and even though our paths are now separating, I will always consider you one of the most important people in my life." Valentina, with tears in her eyes, smiled. "And I will always love you, Giovanni, not like before, but in a way that will never disappear. You will always have a special place in my heart." After that last trip to Tuscany, Valentina and Giovanni returned to Rome, ready to go their separate ways. The separation was amicable, but the transition to a new life brought challenges that Valentina had not foreseen. Being alone in a new apartment, without Giovanni's constant presence, made her confront the emptiness that had settled where there had once been comfort. But over time, Valentina began to realize that this emptiness was, in fact, blank canvas, an opportunity to start over, to rediscover herself without the ties of the past. She immersed herself in activities she had always wanted to do, but had put aside because of the obligations and routine of marriage. She started painting, something she loved in her youth, and enrolled in an Italian cooking class, rediscovering the pleasure of creating something with her own hand. Even with the positive changes, the memory of Matteo still lingered over her. Had she made the right decision in leaving him? This doubt accompanied her, but instead of running away from it, Valentina decided to face it. She knew that to truly move on, she would need to confront the ghosts of the past. One day, she decided to revisit the flying club where she had met Matteo. When she arrived, the place was practically deserted. Only the distant sound of planes broke the silence. Valentina felt a mix of nostalgia and sadness as she walked through the corridors. She went to the hangar where it all had begun. It was like revisiting the stage of a play that had come to an end. Suddenly, a familiar voice echoed behind her. "Valentina?" She turned, and to her surprise, saw Matteo standing at the entrance of the hangar. He looked different, more serene, but with the same smile that had captivated her from the beginning. "Matteo," she said, trying to hide the nervousness in her voice. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same," he replied, walking towards her. "But I think we both know the answer, don't we?" Valentina smiled slightly. "I needed closure, I think. I wanted to see if I still felt the same. And you?" "I come here from time to time to think. So many things have happened here, so many memories. But above all, I think I come to remember that life is made of choices, and that each one of them leads us down a different path." They both were silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Matteo broke the silence. "I'm moving to Switzerland. I got a job offer at a flying club there, and I think I need a fresh start." The news took Valentina by surprise, but she realized it was the best for both of them. "I'm happy for you, Matteo. Really. I think this change will do you good." "And you, Valentina? How are you?" She took a deep breath, feeling the sincerity of the question. "I'm finding myself, little by little, rediscovering who I am and what I want. I think it will still take some time, but I'm on the right track." Matteo smiled, and for a brief moment, Valentina saw the glimmer of hope in his eyes. "That's all I wanted to hear, that you're okay. I think we can move on knowing that, despite everything, we did the best we could." They said goodbye there, without promises, without expectation, just with the certainty that that story had come to an end. Valentina watched him walk away, feeling a peace she hadn't felt since it all began. It was the closure she had been searching for. When she returned home, Valentina felt that something inside her had changed forever. The weight she had been carrying in her heart had finally dissipated. She was no longer bound to the past, nor to the choices she had made. Now she was free to build a new future. In the months that followed, Valentina dedicated herself to her art, began teaching painting classes, and made new friends. She found a new meaning for her life, something that didn't depend on another person, but that came from within herself. And it was in this process of self-discovery that she finally allowed herself to be happy. Fate, with its unpredictable twists, still had a surprise in store for Valentina. One day, while walking through the streets of Rome, she crossed paths with someone she hadn't seen in years, Luca, an old childhood friend she had lost touch with. They recognized each other immediately, and the reunion was marked by laughter and memories of simpler times. Over time, their friendship blossomed again, and Luca became a constant presence in Valentina's life. It was different from Matteo and Giovanni. With Luca, there were no expectations or pressures, just a genuine and sincere connection. And slowly, Valentina began to realize that perhaps true love was there, right beside her, all along. Months passed since Valentina and Luca had rekindled their friendship. Life in Rome continued its course, but for Valentina, everything seemed to have taken on new colors. She had rediscovered joy in the little things, the aroma of fresh coffee in the morning, the leisurely conversations in the city squares, the walks through the gardens of Villa Borghese. Each day, she felt more at peace with herself and with the choices she had made. Luca, in turn, brought an unexpected lightness to Valentina's life. He wasn't a complicated man, full of mysteries or dramas. He was simple, direct, and his presence had a calming effect on Valentina. They began to see each other frequently, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Over time, something changed between them. What had once been a friendship based on childhood memories and reconnection began to transform into something deeper. Valentina found herself thinking about Luca in a different way, the warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. And as much as she tried to ignore it, she knew she was falling in love. One night, after dinner at a small Italian restaurant they both loved, Luca walked her home. On the way, they talked about life, about dreams, and about the future. When they reached the door of Valentina's apartment, silence settled between them, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was as if they both knew what was coming, but were waiting for the right moment. Luca, always observant, noticed the hesitation in Valentina's eyes. He approached her gently and took her hand. "Valentina, I need to tell you something," he began, his voice low and sincere. "I know we've been through a lot and we both have scars, but since we've reunited, something has changed in me. I've fallen in love with you. And I'm not saying this to pressure you or expect anything in return, but because I think you deserve to know." Luca's words touched Valentina deeply. She felt a wave of emotion wash over her heart. There, on that quiet Roman night, she realized that she was ready to start over too. Without the shadows of the past, without the insecurities that had held her captive for so long. "Luca," she replied, looking directly into his eyes, "I've fallen in love with you too. This time, I want to do everything differently. I want to build something based on trust, on truth, without the complications I've lived through before." Luca smiled, a smile that conveyed not only happiness but also relief. "So let's do this together, Valentina, without rushing, at our own pace." And so, their relationship blossomed, slowly but with a solidity that Valentina had never experienced before. They began to travel together, explore new places, and rediscover the city they loved from a new perspective. Each moment was a new opportunity to create memories, without the pressure of the past or unrealistic expectations. A year had passed since they had started dating, and during one of those trips around Italy, Luca took her to the Amalfi Coast, one of the most beautiful places they had ever visited. It was a sunny afternoon, and they were walking along a trail overlooking the sea. Valentina was absorbed in the scenery when Luca stopped suddenly. "Valentina, there's something I've wanted to ask you for a while," he said, his voice filled with emotion. The words hung in the air, and Valentina's heart nearly skipped a beat. It wasn't something she had expected at that moment, but looking into Luca's eyes, she saw the sincerity, love, and security he offered her. A love that wasn't based on overwhelming passions or complicated dramas, but on a genuine connection, built over time and with patience. With tears in her eyes, she replied, "Yes, Luca, I will." And so, Valentina finally found the happily ever after she deserved, not only in the arms of someone who loved her, but also in her own journey of self-discovery and redemption. Life doesn't always follow the paths we expect, but sometimes the surprises of fate take us exactly where we need to be. And you, dear reader, who has followed this story to the end, I hope you have found something here that inspires you, moves you, and perhaps helps you reflect on your own choices and path. Life is full of twists and turns, and each one has its purpose. And as we say, everything works out in the end.